And now we're going to see how the papacy has morphed into something visibly different than the traditional papacy. I'd like to begin by reading a statement that we find in Great Controversy, page 595. Great Controversy, page 595. Well-known statement. But God will have a people upon the earth to maintain the Bible, and the Bible only, as the standard of all doctrines and the basis of all reforms. The opinions of learned men, the deductions of science, the creeds or decisions of ecclesiastical councils, as numerous and discordant as are the churches which they represent, the voice of the majority, not one nor all of these should be regarded as evidence for or against any point of religious faith. Before accepting any doctrine or precept, we should demand a plain, "Thus saith the Lord," in its support. So Ellen White states that not the opinions of learned men, not the deductions of science, not ecclesiastical creeds, not ecclesiastical councils, not the voice of the majority, and I would add, not human experience, should determine what we believe, but only what the Bible teaches. Now, as we examine the story of creation in Genesis, it is clear that creation took place in a literal week of 7 days, and that each day consisted of 24 hours, just like the days that we know now. How do we know that the days of creation are literal days? And you're going to see where I'm going with this, because we're going to speak about the papacy in a few moments, which is radically different than what we find in the book of Genesis. How do we know that the days of creation were literal 24-hour days just like we know today? I'm going to give you 9 reasons. Reason number 1, the Hebrew lexicons, the word lexicon is a dictionary that defines the meaning of words. Hebrew lexicons all agree that the word day in Genesis 1 refers to a literal 24-hour day. In other words, those who are experts in defining words in Hebrew, experts in Hebrew, say the word day in Genesis means a literal day. So we should listen to the dictionary. Second, in the Old Testament, the word day appears with a numeral qualifier around 250 times. That is, it was the evening, morning, day 1, day 2. Whenever it has a numeral qualifier, without exception in the Old Testament, it always refers to a literal 24-hour day. No exceptions. Third, each day had an evening and morning, which would be ridiculous to say it was the evening and the morning of the first 1,000,000 years. The expression evening and morning refers to the setting and the rising of the sun. The expression evening and morning indicates that the days of creation were literal days with an evening and a morning. Furthermore, the Bible uses the language of immediacy, quickness, when it refers to creation. Psalm 33 and verse 9 says, God spoke and it was done. He commanded and it stood fast. Those expressions don't allow for something that takes millions or billions of years. It has the language of immediacy and quickness. 4 times in the story of creation, this is reason number 5, 4 times in the creation story, there's another expression that indicates that what happened occurred quickly. It is the expression, and it was so. God spoke, and it was so. That's found in Genesis 1, verse 7, verse 11, verse 15, and verse 24. The 6th reason, the 4th commandment of God's law, clearly shows that the days of creation were literal days. You say, how is that? Well, the fourth commandment says that we are to work 6 literal 24-hour days, and we are to rest on the literal 7th 24-hour day, because God worked 6 days and ceased on the 7th. How could we follow God's example of working 6 days and resting on the 7th unless God worked 6 literal days and rested on the 7th? If the days were millions of years long, we could not follow God's example. Are you understanding this? So the fourth commandment clearly shows that the days of creation were literal 24-hour days. Seventh reason. The New Testament writers believed that the story of creation in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 occurred literally, just as it's written. Let's start with Jesus. In Matthew 19, verses 4 through 6, he says, "And he answered to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate." When did God create man and woman? Was it a process that took millions and millions of years? No, Jesus said, who made them at the beginning. So Jesus believed that there was an Adam and an Eve. And the creation story tells us that they were created the 6th day. Reason number, by the way, let me read what Paul also said. 1 Corinthians 15, 47 to 49. He says, the first man was of the earth, made of dust. So did the Apostle Paul believe in the original story that Adam was made from the dust of the ground? Of course. The second man is the Lord from heaven. As was the man of the dust, so are those who are made of dust. That's us. And as it is the heavenly man, so also are those who are heavenly. And as we have borne the image of the man of dust, not of monkeys, we borne the image of the man of dust, so shall also we bear the image of the heavenly man. So clearly, Jesus and Paul believe that the story of creation literally took place. Reason number 8. Ellen White confirms that the days of creation were literal 24-hour days. For Adventists, we believe that the spirit of prophecy is true, that Ellen White was inspired. So reason number 8 is that Ellen White clearly states that the days of creation were literal days. Let me read you just 2 statements. Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 1, page 85. "I was then carried back to the creation." She's seen this in vision. "And was shown that the first week in which God performed the work of creation in 6 days and rested on the 7th day was just like every other week. The great God, in his days of creation and day of rest, measured off the first cycle as a sample for successive weeks till the close of time." In another statement, Testimonies to Ministers 135, she wrote, "When the Lord declares that he made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th day, he means the day of 24 hours, which he has marked off by the rising and setting of the sun." Now, how can you be more explicit than that? Once again, he means the day of 24 hours, which he has marked off by the rising and setting of the sun. Reason number 9 is that not only do Adventists, we're not the only ones that believe that the days of creation were literal days. There are creationist scientists of other denominations who believe the same. One of those, for example, is Henry Morris. He was actually the head of the Institute of Creation Science in San Diego, California. Good friend of Adventists. And he wrote the following in his book, Biblical Creationism, page 62. "The Lord himself had worked 6 days, then rested on the 7th, setting thereby a permanent pattern for the benefit of mankind. So God worked 6 days, he rested the seventh as a permanent pattern for us. So there are many reasons why we know that the days of creation were literal days. Do you know that Satan has almost totally won the victory already in establishing Sunday? He didn't wait until there was a national Sunday law. Through the theory of evolution, most people in the world today have basically denied the story of creation. And along with the story of creation, the Sabbath. Because if creation didn't take place in 6 literal days, and God didn't rest the literal 7th day, then there's no basis today for observing the Sabbath. So Satan has gotten rid of the Sabbath through the theory of evolution, which most people today believe, with the exception of conservative Christians, which are in the minority. So the devil has discarded the Sabbath even before a Sunday law. He has most of the world already in his camp, if you please. But there are some scientists, so-called, a handful of them Adventists, who try to accommodate the creation story to the discoveries of science. Discoveries in quotation marks. They try to accommodate the biblical story to science, so-called. Ellen White warned against this. In the book Education, page 128 and 129, she wrote, "Inferences erroneously drawn from facts observed in nature have, however, led to the supposed conflict between science and revelation." So discoveries, she says, inferences by studying nature have led some to conclude that there's a supposed conflict between science and revelation. And now notice what the solution is in the minds of these scientists. And in the effort to restore harmony, that is between the biblical creation story and the discoveries, so-called, of science, in the effort to restore harmony, interpretations of Scripture have been adopted that undermine and destroy the force of the Word of God. Geology has been thought to contradict the literal interpretation of the Mosaic record of creation. Millions of years, it is claimed, were required for the evolution of the earth from chaos. And in order to accommodate the Bible to this supposed revelation of science, the days of creation are assumed to have been vast, indefinite periods covering thousands or even millions of years to accommodate the biblical story to science, so-called. In other words, the idea is, yeah, it says in Genesis days, but the day is symbolic of much longer periods of time. And then she ends the statement by saying, such a conclusion is wholly uncalled for. The Bible record is in harmony with itself and with the teaching of nature. So no need to accommodate the Bible to scientific discoveries, in quotation marks, because nature and Scripture are in harmony when properly understood. Now, why do I mention this as we begin this afternoon? We're going to dwell now on the papacy's view of creation. It is a fact that neither John Paul II nor Francis I believed that the story of creation literally took place as it is written in the book of Genesis. Both of these very influential popes, John Paul II, who was pope for decades, and Francis I, have concluded that the biblical story of creation is a symbolic story that wants to teach us lessons, but that creation did not take place as it is recorded in Genesis chapter 1. Both have taught that the universe came into existence by a big bang, and that the world has evolved over the course of billions of years by a process of macroevolution. John Paul, in a speech that he gave to the Papal Academy of the Sciences, which was also printed, referred to evolution as more than a hypothesis, and also said that studies in the various branches of science have presented a significant argument in favor of the theory. I want to read his own words now. Today, John Paul wrote, new knowledge has led to the recognition of the theory of evolution as more than a hypothesis. It is indeed remarkable that this theory has been progressively accepted by researchers following a series of discoveries in various fields of knowledge. The convergence of these discoveries, neither sought nor fabricated, of the results of work that was conducted independently, is in itself a significant argument in favor of the theory. So evolution is more than a hypothesis. And according to him, these studies, which were conducted independently in the different areas of science, microbiology, chemistry, biology, etc., present a significant argument in favor of the theory. Now, there was a newspaper writer, he actually wrote an interesting article for the Chicago Tribune, where he was brutally honest that there's no way that you can really reconcile the biblical story with the scientific assumption. And the Pope, of course, he tries to do both. He says, yeah, we accept the story of creation, but we accommodate it to long periods of time that science requires. See, he wants to win over scientists as well. Here's what this Stephen Swanson wrote about the papacy's view. In a major statement of the Roman Catholic Church's position on the theory of evolution, Pope John Paul II has proclaimed that the theory is more than just a hypothesis, and that evolution is compatible with Christian faith. What does he say? What does the Pope say? That evolution is what? Compatible with Christian faith. You can, in other words, accommodate Christian faith to the scientific view of evolution. In a written message, he continues, to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, the Pope said, the theory of evolution has been buttressed by scientific studies and discoveries since Charles Darwin. And then he writes this, if taken literally, the biblical view of the beginning of life and Darwin's scientific view would seem irreconcilable. Is he right? Yeah. If taken literally, the biblical view of the beginning of life and Darwin's scientific view would seem irreconcilable. In Genesis, the creation of the world and Adam, the first human, took 6 days. Evolution's process of genetic mutation and natural selection, the survival and proliferation of the fittest new species, has taken billions of years according to the scientists. So he's saying there's no way you can reconcile the biblical story with the theory of evolution. And yet the Pope John Paul II said, yeah, you can still be a Christian and you can still believe the story of evolution as presented by science, so-called. Now, Pope Francis goes even further than John Paul. You see, he wants to impress the world of academia. He knows that if the church stands that the story of creation in Genesis is literal, the scientists will be against the Catholic Church and the majority of world leaders as well. Pope Francis has made it clear that he believes in the Big Bang Theory. Basically, has nothing to do with a television program, by the way. The idea is that 13.8 billion years ago, when none of us were around, there was this little particle or speck in the universe, a small singularity or a point. And at that point, it began to expand or to stretch over the course of 13.8 billion years. And the universe that we know today is the result. I want to read you what Pope Francis said to the Papal Academy of the Sciences on October 14, 2014. The Big Bang, which today we hold to be the origin of the world, not us, him. When he says we, he's talking about the papacy. The Big Bang, which today we hold to be the origin of the world, does not contradict the intervention of the divine creator, but rather requires it. So he says, we can still believe in a divine creator, and we can believe in evolution. What is he talking about? I continue. Evolution in nature is not inconsistent with the notion of creation, because evolution requires the creation of beings that evolve. In other words, God created in nature the mechanism that would permit evolution. He incorporated in nature the capacity to evolve over millions and billions of years. So he says evolution in nature is not inconsistent with the notion of creation, because evolution requires the creation of beings that evolve. Then he said this, and he also wrote it. When we read about creation in Genesis, we run the risk of imagining God was a magician with a magic wand, able to do everything, but that is not so. It's amazing. And then he writes, he created human beings, and of course originally they were created like a monkey, see? He created human beings and let them develop. See, incorporated in the original lower forms, he incorporated the mechanism or the capacity to evolve. In that sense, God is involved in the course of millions of years. So once again, he created human beings and let them develop according to the internal laws that he gave to each one, so that they would reach their fulfillment. Are you understanding what the papal view is? Notice what the Pope wrote in his encyclical, Laudato Si. Paragraph 81, he wrote, human beings, even if we postulate a process of evolution, did you catch that? Human beings, even if we postulate a process of evolution, also possess a uniqueness which cannot be fully explained by the evolution of other open systems. Because what the Catholic Church believes is that God did use millions and billions of years for us to get where we are now, but at certain critical points God intervened to nudge the process forward. So when you have this well-developed monkey, God intervened and gave the monkey a soul or the capacity to reason, and now you have the precursor of what we are today. Is that the view that the Bible presents? Totally not. He also wrote in paragraph 66 of his encyclical, the creation of accounts in the book of Genesis contain, in their own symbolic, the stories in Genesis are what? They're symbolic, not literal. The creation accounts in the book of Genesis contain, in their own symbolic and narrative language, profound teachings about human existence and its historical reality. Actually, the Pope is a pantheist. Did pantheism try to enter the Adventist church at some point in its history? Yeah, it's trying to enter the church now through things like spiritual formation, contemplative prayer. That's the practice of pantheism. The Pope is a pantheist. He believes that the universe is evolving, and eventually everything will work itself out, and you'll have an era of peace and prosperity, and everything will go well through the process of evolution. I want you to notice 3 statements by the Pope in his encyclical that shows that he is a pantheist. He believes that everything in the world is divine and is moving on to a convergence. Actually, he has the view of a Jesuit scientist by the name of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. There's a whole chapter in the book that was written by Malachi Martin, the book that's called The Jesuits, on this particular scientist, Jesuit scientist, and his view, pantheistic view. And of course, Francis I is a Jesuit, and he's embraced this view that God is in everything, and everything is moving towards converging, towards a unity where there'll be peace and harmony in the universe. I read from paragraph 92 of his encyclical. Everything is related, and we human beings are united as brothers and sisters on a wonderful pilgrimage, woven together by the love of God, by the love God has for each of his creatures, and which also unites us in fond affection with brother sun, sister moon, brother river, and mother earth. Earth is not my mother. And the moon is not my sister. Paragraph 233. The universe unfolds in God, who fills it completely. Hence, we find a mystical meaning in a leaf, in a mountain trail, in a dewdrop, in a poor person's face. The ideal is not only to pass from the exterior to the interior to discover the action of God in the soul, now listen, but also to discover God in all things. Is God in all things? God is not in all things. God created all things. He is not in all things. Paragraph 246 is a prayer with which Pope Francis ends his encyclical, and this is part of his prayer. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. God is not present in everything. That's pantheism. The word pantheism means God in everything. God is not in everything. God sits on his throne in heaven. God is separate from his creation. He sustains his creation, but he is a person separate from his creation. He is not in creation. He is not part of creation. So what are the devastating implications of the Roman Catholic papal view of creation? First of all, heterosexual marriage is based on the creation story. Correct? It says in Genesis, as well in Matthew 19, verses 4 through 6, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. But what happens if the story of creation is not literal? Then heterosexual marriage becomes something of preference because there is no divine foundation that God established at the beginning. Are you with me? What about gender identity? How many genders did God create? 2, not 50. It says in Genesis 1:27, Male and female, He created them. How many genders did God create? 2. How many genders do people say that there are today? Whatever your choice is. 50 or 60. Different ones. There are parents that are not even assigning a gender to their babies because they say, let's wait till they reach a certain age, then they can choose their own gender. The duality of gender is based on the creation story. But if you discard the creation story, then you can have more than one gender because there's no divine foundation for dual gender. It gets more serious. On what is the Sabbath based? On a literal creation story. We keep the literal seventh day because we believe that at creation there was a literal seventh day. What happens with the Sabbath if you believe that the days were long evolutionary periods? The Sabbath is gone as the seventh day of rest. In Genesis 2 it says, the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. According to the Apostle Paul, in many characteristics in Genesis, God established certain functions for the male and certain functions for the female, in the home and in the church. But if you reject the creation story, then the roles of male and female are interchangeable. In other words, role distinctions, not only gender distinctions, but role distinctions within the genders disappear if you don't believe that God established those functions at creation and that the story is literal. Furthermore, the Bible teaches us that after sin, the strong must help the weak and the rich must help the poor. In fact, Pope Francis, in his encyclical, constantly says that the rich should help the poor, and the strong should help the weak. But his teaching does not square with his scientific theory. Because the scientific theory of evolution functions on the basis of the survival of the fittest, known technically as natural selection. The strong survive and the weak disappear. The rich thrive and the poor fall into the dust. So how can someone like the Pope say, I believe in evolution, which is based on the survival of the fittest, where the strong win and the weak lose, and then say now, well, the strong need to help the weak? There's a disconnect there. Even more seriously, the papal view destroys a soon expectation of the second coming of Jesus. If we're in a process, long process of evolution, how much longer are we going to have to wait for the process to reach its climax? Where is there a hope of a soon coming of Jesus with the angels from heaven to destroy the world and cleanse it and make a new heavens and a new earth? How long is it going to take him to make a new heavens and a new earth? Another million of years? You see, if we discard a literal beginning, a literal fall, literal spiritual redemption from the fall, and a literal second coming, what do we have left? Nothing. But the papal view not only totally destroys what God established at creation, which is heterosexual marriage, two genders, distinctive functions for the two genders, the Sabbath, and the idea that the strong should help the weak, which goes against the idea of natural selection. But this theory mars the beautiful character of God. It is an attack on the omnipotence of God. The fact that God is all-powerful. Does not God have the almighty power to create things instantaneously by speaking them into existence? That is his power so limited that he has to use a system of millions and millions of years for things to perfect? Isn't he powerful enough to speak and have it done? It's an attack on the omniscience and the wisdom of God. You see, the mechanism of evolution functions on the basis of a method of trial and error, where through the course of millions of years, evolution irons out the glitches in the process. Does this reflect your picture of God? That he uses a method where there are many blind alleys, where you need to iron out the glitches in the process? Couldn't God create everything perfect from the start without using a method of trial and error which involves waste, suffering, and death? In the book Here I Stand, page 277, here's a description of evolution. Evolution presents a bloody, ruthless struggle for existence from the very beginning, where there is much waste of living substance and many false starts and blind alleys. Does that sound like a wise and intelligent God? Not in my mind. Is this the God who was, by the way, Jesus Christ, the Creator? Is this the same person who, when he fed the 5,000, he said, pick up all that remains so that nothing is wasted? Is this the same God that when he fed the 4,000 said, pick up every bit that is left over so that nothing is wasted? Would God use a method where there's all kinds of waste and blind alleys and restarts if God is all wise? Absolutely not. It is also an attack on the love and mercy of God. How can a God of love use a method where there's so much suffering and cruelty and pain and death? Does this sound like the God that cares for the sparrows and dresses the lilies of the field? But even more seriously, the theory of evolution is an attack on the need for a Savior. Listen carefully. If the Genesis account of a perfect Adam and Eve in a perfect garden is symbolic, then the story of the fall must also be symbolic. And the result then is that salvation is perfecting through the process of evolution. Let me read you a statement by a Roman Catholic theologian, Carl Schmitz-Moorman. He wrote this. He's a very liberal Catholic, doesn't believe the creation story, but what he says is brutally true. The notion of the traditional view of redemption as reconciliation and ransom from the consequences of Adam's fall, the notion of the traditional view of redemption as reconciliation and ransom from the consequences of Adam's fall is nonsense for anyone who knows about the evolutionary background to human existence in the modern world. Further, salvation cannot mean returning to an original state, but must be conceived as perfecting through the process of evolution. Are you catching the picture? Frank L. Marsh, Adventist scientist, wrote the following: if death and the law of tooth and claw existed long before man, and if man evolved through these natural processes, then there could not have been a perfect Garden of Eden nor a perfect Adam and Eve. Nor could there have been a real fall in which man became subject to sin. If that is so, what is the theological meaning of Jesus' incarnation and atonement? Paul connects the two. For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so also by one man's obedience many will be made righteous. If there was no Garden of Eden with its tree of life, what is the future that Revelation 22 depicts for the redeemed? Quite a statement. You see, the Bible presents a chain of events. First, God created Adam and Eve perfect, with no inclination to sin. Second, Adam and Eve ate from a literal tree and literally fell into sin. The virus of sin literally passed on to all of Adam and Eve's descendants. And because the virus of sin passed on to all of their descendants, death came in to all. And because there is death, we need a redeemer from death. Are you following me? So you have the entrance of sin, death, and a redeemer from death. But what happens if you eliminate a perfect beginning? Then death is not the consequence of sin. So why would we need a redeemer? The Bible also teaches that after saving us from the guilt and power of sin, God will rapidly create a new heavens and a new earth. That's the biblical view. Totally negated by the theory which the papacy upholds, the theory of evolution, even where God intervenes at certain critical points in the process. So the papacy not only wants to win over the socialist powers of the world, the nations of the world, the majority of them today, with the exception of a few capitalist nations, but he also wants to win over to the papacy the world of academia. The papacy cannot do this, cannot win over the socialist powers of the world unless the papacy embraces the agenda that the socialist powers have. And unless the papacy embraces the theory of evolution which the world of science today embraces. The whole idea is fitting in with the world of science, fitting in with the way of thinking of the globalist, socialist nations of the world. So now let's talk a little bit about the Jesuit strategy. I was tempted to call this series the Jesuit Conspiracy. But then I thought, well, you know, everywhere I go, almost people ask, do you think that maybe there might be infiltrated Jesuits in the Adventist Church? I've never met one. There might be. But I'll tell you, the big problem is not that the Catholic Church, the papacy, has taken individuals and planted them in the Adventist Church. The big problem is that we've sent our teachers to non-Adventist institutions. And they've imbibed many of the ideas there, and they brought them back into the church. And they've taught our ministers, and our ministers embrace those views, and then they share them with the church. That's where the real problem is. Not an infiltrated Jesuit here and an infiltrated Jesuit there. But the amazing story that we're going to study now is that the Jesuits have infiltrated their own church. There's a Jesuit conspiracy with the Roman Catholic Church. They've basically taken it over. And now I'm going to tell you the fascinating story, the rest of the story. As we've previously seen, in order for the Roman Catholic papacy to recover the power that it lost, it needs to fulfill two objectives. The first objective is to win the confidence of the globalist socialist powers of the world so that they will have confidence in the papacy again. Because in 1798 and years after, the powers of the world did not allow the papacy to use them anymore. And second, the papacy needs to merge with Protestants. They need to win over Protestants. And we notice that that's through false charity, liberal ideas, and unity on common points of doctrine. So the papal strategy is twofold. Win over the political leaders of the world, the socialist leaders of the world, and secondly, win over Protestants so that you can have a synthesis of that which previously was in tension or at enmity. So let's talk about the founder of the Jesuits. His name, Ignatius Loyola. He founded the Jesuit order in 1534 with one specific purpose, composed of two parts. I read from the book The Jesuits by a Jesuit, Malachi Martin, page 28. He wrote, "The Jesuits were giants, but with one purpose: the defense and propagation of papal authority and papal teaching." Basically, the Jesuits were founded to be obedient to the theology of the papal church and to be obedient to the authority of the Pope. And the Jesuits lived up to their calling until the 50s and 60s of last century. They defended the papacy, the authority of the papal chair, and they defended the orthodox doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. However, in the early 60s, postmodernism, liberalism, began eroding the authority of the papal throne and the dogmas of the Roman Catholic Church. In the early 60s, from 1962 to 1965, a very important council was celebrated in the Roman Catholic Church, a general council, Council Vatican II. In this council, the authority of the papal chair was diminished, and the unchangeable nature of the dogmas of the Roman Catholic Church began to be questioned. In fact, I'd like to read what Malachi Martin wrote. By the way, he was an eyewitness to what happened there. He wrote concerning what happened in the aftermath of Vatican Council II, "The hurricanes of change had swept through all. A different spirit reigned among the delegates." These are the delegates to the General Conference 31 of the Jesuits, the 31 General Assembly of the Jesuits. He wrote, "A very different Father General was in charge." That's the head of the Jesuits. "A very different atmosphere filled the Rome of the popes. And Jesuitism had already received a new mold." So there was a change in the Jesuits. No longer was their agenda to defend papal teaching and to defend the authority of the Pope. Vatican II changed their emphasis. The catchword for Vatican II was the Italian word aggiornamento, which means renewal. According to conservative Vatican insiders, this council was a watershed event in the history of the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, shortly after the council, a new Father General was elected, a Spaniard by the name of Pedro de Arrupe y Gondra, Father General number 27 of the Jesuit order. He was elected in 1965. And during his 18 years that he was Father General of the Jesuit order, the rebellion of the Jesuits against the papacy, against their own organization, consolidated and intensified. They liberalized and changed the focus of the Jesuit order. It is an undisputed fact, and you can check this out by doing research, that in the late 50s and early 60s, the Jesuits have been undermining the idea that the Catholic Church dogmas are absolute truth, unchangeable, and that the definer of doctrine is the Pope. You see, the Jesuits realized that they were living in an increasingly secular, liberal, postmodern world. And they needed to adapt of the mood of the age to win the support of the world. According to Malachi Martin in his book, by the way, if you can get a copy of the book, The Jesuits, very interesting book. A lot of things we don't agree with, but the history that he tells there is really eye-opening, and how the Jesuit order has changed the focus of the Roman Catholic Church. According to the book, Pope Paul VI and Pope John Paul II and Pope John Paul I spent many sleepless nights because they were struggling against an out-of-control Jesuit order. In 1987, this was, by the way, 33 years ago, that Malachi Martin wrote this: "A state of war exists between the papacy and the religious order of the Jesuits." What? You think that the Jesuits are at war with the Adventist Church? Yeah, that too. But we're saying this Jesuit, Malachi Martin, conservative Jesuit, he didn't go along with the new agenda. He was distressed by the changes in the Jesuit order. But he says a state of war exists between the papacy and the religious order of the Jesuits. 33 years ago he wrote this. The Society of Jesus, to give the order its official name. Listen carefully. The war signals the most lethal change to take place within the ranks of the professional Roman clergy over the last 1,000 years. And as with all important events in the Roman Catholic Church, it involves the interests, the lives, and the destinies of ordinary men and women in their millions. So did this conservative Jesuit recognize that there had been a shift among the Jesuits in their emphasis and mission? Absolutely, and he was an insider. Now let's move on to the pontificate of John Paul I. This story is going to become more and more interesting as we move along. You say, John Paul I, who's that? Well, before there was a John Paul II, there was a John Paul I. He ascended to the throne in 1978 when Pope Paul VI died. John Paul I had expressed his misgivings about the liberal and rebellious trends of the Jesuits. In other words, he was a conservative pope. And he had actually promised that he was going to take measures to correct the problem with the Jesuits. So according to Malachi Martin, the Pope planned to give a hard-hitting speech at the meeting of the General Congregation of the Jesuit Order on September 30, 1978. So Pope John Paul I was going to give a speech to the Jesuits, and he was going to tell them, you shape up and return to the reason why you were established, to defend the theology of the Church and to defend the authority of the Pope. That speech was supposed to be given on September 30, 1978. According to Malachi Martin, he was going to give this hard-hitting speech, and he was going to tell the Jesuits that unless they shaped up, he would dissolve the order with the possibility of reestablishing it later on. The day before he was to give his speech, 33 days into his pontificate, he was found dead in his bed, and no autopsy was performed. Makes you wonder what's going on, huh? So when John Paul I died, the conclave Do you know what conclave means? Conclave, it means under key, because they're shut in the Sistine Chapel by lock and key until they elect a pope. So the conclave met and elected Karol Wojtyla, whom we know as John Paul II. John Paul II was a traditionalist, conservative pope, and extremely anti-communist, because he was from Poland, which was part of the Eastern Bloc. And you know he struggled with this solidarity movement in Poland. John Paul believed in the absolute authority of the Pope, and he believed in the dogmas of the Roman Catholic Church. But the Jesuits didn't. On page 28 of his book, The Jesuits, Malachi Martin wrote, "The contradiction between John Paul's Polish model and the liberation model advocated ardently and openly by the Jesuits in Latin America could not have been more stark or bold-faced." In other words, there's a radical difference between the Pope's model as he fought against communism in Poland and what the Jesuits wanted to establish in Central America at the same time. John Paul II and his successor, Benedict XVI, were popes of a dying breed. They staunchly defended papal authority and the dogmas or doctrines of the Church. During their conservative pontificates, by the way, Benedict was the head of what was anciently known as the Inquisition, which today is called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. During the period of these two popes, the papal talking points were marriage between a man and a woman, against euthanasia, against abortion, against LGBT, against those who were attacking papal authority, and those who were trying to change the teachings of the Church. Those were their talking points. In fact, both John Paul II and Benedict XVI dismissed several theologians from their teaching posts for teaching doctrines contrary to the traditional doctrines of the Church. Probably the most famous was an individual called Hans Küng. He was a theology teacher at the University of Tübingen in Europe. So in other words, there was war between John Paul II and the Jesuits within the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope was anti-communist, and the Pope was in favor of papal authority and the doctrines of the Church. The Jesuits wanted to change everything. Now, the talking points of Pope John Paul II and Benedict XVI were not liked by the global political leaders, because the United Nations is in favor of abortion. The United Nations is in favor of euthanasia. It's in favor of gay marriage. The socialist powers of the world are in favor of what these conservative popes were against. So there needed to be a change of talking points, because the secular media and the United Nations frowned on the topics of discussion of these conservative popes. The progressive mood of the day of inclusiveness, pluralism, political correctness, and postmodern thinking required a change in talking points. But these two conservative popes stood in the way. Now I want us to consider for just a few moments communism as it attempted to take over Central America. Those of you who are my age remember the issue of the Contras in Central America, where communism, was beginning to thrive in Nicaragua, El Salvador. Looked like communism was going to take over in our very own neighborhood. John Paul II was not only a conservative pope, but he was a deadly enemy of communism. And he fought tooth and nail against the communist bloc in what was known as the Soviet Union. So at this point, there was no synthesis. With these conservative popes, there was no synthesis between the papacy and socialism. But it's what the Jesuits wanted. Are you understanding what I'm saying? At the same time, in the United States, Ronald Reagan was allied with John Paul II to attack communism. In fact, on Time magazine, there appeared an article. There was a picture of the Pope and Ronald Reagan shaking hands, and the title was "The Holy Alliance." You see, at this time, there were problems in Central America. In the 1970s, communism was trying to take over in our very own neighborhood. The insurgent Jesuits, this is something that many people don't know, the insurgent Jesuits were really the source of the problem. Jesuit bishops in Central America were not only Roman Catholics, they were communists. In the decade of the 1980s, the problems intensified with what is known as liberation theology. It's the Christian version of Marxism or communism. Pope John Paul II made a visit to Nicaragua, and he was treated with disdain and disrespect by the Jesuit priests and by the populace. It's interesting that these Jesuits in Central America that wanted to bring in communism, they were Catholics, but they were also Marxists. They used the traditional language of the Roman Catholic Church, but they gave that language a totally new meaning. Let me just read you this statement from, once again, Malachi Martin, a Vatican insider. This is page 57 of his book. Liberation theology, which is the Christian version of Marxism, liberation theology was the perfect blueprint for the Sandinistas. Those were the communists that wanted to bring in communism. Liberation theology incorporated the very aim of Marxism-Leninism. It presumed the classic Marxist struggle of the classes to be free from all capitalist domination. Above all, the Marxist baby was at last wrapped in the very swaddling clothes of ancient Catholic terminology. In other words, the Marxist baby was wrapped in Roman Catholic terminology. And so now I want to read how the theological meaning of words was changed by the Jesuits. The historical Jesus, for example, became an armed revolutionary. The mystical Christ became all the oppressed people, collectively. Mary the Virgin became the mother of all revolutionary heroes. The Eucharist, what we call the Lord's Supper, became the bread freely made by the liberated workers. Hell became the capitalist system. The American president, leader of the greatest capitalist country in the world, became the great Satan. These are the Jesuits saying this, contrary to what the traditional pope or papacy believed. Heaven became the earthly paradise of workers from which capitalism is abolished. Justice became the uprooting of capitalist gains, which would be returned to the people, to the mystical body of Christ, the democratic socialists of Nicaragua. Are you seeing what's happening here? What are the Jesuits doing? They're moving away from doctrine. They're moving away from the authority of the Pope. They're saying, let's not discuss so much doctrine or the authority of the Pope. We need a new focus. We need to win over the socialist communist nations of the world. And we're not going to do it with the traditional talking points, because that's not what the globalist powers want to hear. So Malachi Martin wrote this book, The Jesuits. You know, I had this book for years in my library. Just kind of sat there. Then about 6 months ago, you know, I was looking through my books. I have most of them in boxes now because I don't have any place to put them. But I was looking through the books that I have on my bookcases, and I saw this one, The Jesuits. I'd never read it. I said, I think I'll give it a whirl. It's a big book, probably about 500 pages. So I started reading it. And so I said, when was this written? So I went and looked, 1987. I said, now wait a minute. Everything he said in 1987 is happening now. Not that he was a prophet, but that he's a staunch Roman Catholic, and the Roman Catholic Church has been around for 1,500 years, and they can read what's going to happen by the law of cause and effect because they've seen it happen before. So he wrote this book, and in this book he was aghast. This Jesuit, Malachi Martin, was totally distressed by the new focus of the Jesuits, of the own order that he belonged to. In fact, eventually he resigned from the Jesuit order. He was so disgusted. And in the book he documents in minute detail the shift of the Jesuits to totally transform and change the Roman Catholic Church's talking points. Now let's talk about Pope Benedict's retirement. Most people believe that Benedict XVI retired from the papal throne because of the sexual abuse scandal of children. So the Roman Catholic Church wanted to get rid of him because he was involved in the scandal. They wanted to start afresh. However, that was not the real reason. In order to carry forward the agenda, the new agenda of the Jesuits, they needed a liberal pope that would not focus on the orthodoxy of church dogmas or the authority of the pope, but someone who would please the politicians of the world and would make it easier for Protestants to join the papacy, because Benedict had said during his pontificate that the Protestant churches are not true churches. Well, that went over like a lead balloon among Protestants. It was necessary to have a pope that would implement the new agenda of the Jesuits. Benedict did not resign of his own free will. The papal talking points needed to change, and as long as Benedict was there, the talking points were not going to change. It's interesting, Malachi Martin wrote this on page 17 of his book. Though the movement of the Socialists has been global since its inception, it was above all in Latin America that the strange alliance between Jesuits and Marxists gathered its first practical momentum. It was there, in Latin America, that this new Jesuit mission, entailing as it does nothing less than the transformation of the socio-political face of the West. So what is the purpose of the Jesuits? To change the transformation of the socio-political face of the West. Eliminate this idea that a nation needs to look out for itself. Internationalism, globalism, everyone working together. He continued writing in other Central American countries. Meanwhile, listen carefully, Jesuits not only participated in guerrilla training of Marxist cadres, but some of the Jesuits became guerrilla fighters themselves. Regarding the Jesuit war against church dogmas, Martin wrote this: there is not one major dogma or one capital moral law of Roman Catholicism that has not been challenged, both challenged and denied by individual Jesuits. Once again, there is not one major dogma, we call them doctrines, or one capital moral law of Roman Catholicism that has not been both challenged and denied by individual Jesuits. Beginning with Jesuits of the highest rank and the most honored stature. One of the great theologians of the 20th century in Roman Catholicism was Karl Rahner, considered probably the greatest Roman Catholic scholar of the 20th century. Notice what he wrote, Jesuit. He's a Jesuit. He wrote, to achieve Christian unity, this is Martin writing about what Karl Rahner believed. To achieve Christian unity, he said, it was necessary to drop all insistence on papal infallibility as a dogma. Drop the idea that the Pope is infallible. And to drop insistence as well on all other doctrines about the Roman Pontiff and Roman Catholicism that had been defined and proposed by popes since the 4th century. Get rid of what? Get rid of papal infallibility, the authority of the papal chair. Get rid of the doctrines. Don't emphasize them. Why? Because if the papacy emphasizes those, there's no unity with the rulers of the world. Or with Protestantism, for that matter. Now, our time is up. Don't miss the next segment, because I'm going to talk about the first Jesuit pope. And I'm going to talk to you about who the Father General of the Jesuits is today. See, this is a spider web where each part is joined together with the other part. What Malachi Martin wrote 33 years ago is transpiring right before our eyes. So at this time, I think we're going to have a Q&A for about a half an hour. And then we will continue with the next segment. You can be thankful that I don't charge my services on Sabbath. Just kidding.
I believe we're going to have 2 or 3 mics. Are we going to have the stands like we talked about? Because we wanted to have them come to where we were rather than running mics all over the sanctuary. So raise your hand. I guess they've changed that plan. So raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll get a mic to you.
Can you further explain it? I'm not clear really what a Jesuit is. I know you say it's an order, but I guess I don't get the concept of it. Is it's a philosophy, and somebody says, "Yeah, I think I believe that. Let me sign on," or I just guess I don't quite understand what it is.
It's a class that you do. It's kind of like belonging to a club. Basically they study in Jesuit universities and then they apply to join the Jesuit order.
So is it more educators? More so than others?
Well, there are different schools within the Roman Catholic Church. You have the Augustinians, you have the Dominicans.
Okay.
These are religious orders within the Roman Catholic Church. You have the Jesuits. You have different orders, or we would call them different clubs in the Roman Catholic Church. And of course, the most dangerous of those are the Jesuits, because they're the oldest and they have the most experience, and they're the ones that are driving the change in the Roman Catholic Church. So they are, it's hard to describe other than say that the Roman Catholic Church is composed of many different clubs, and individuals decide to join those clubs. And so the Jesuits are an order of the Roman Catholic Church.
But for instance, if you have the cardinals, do they all belong to one of these clubs, or are there some that are just, no, I don't want to belong?
No, the cardinals belong to different orders in the Catholic Church. The cardinals are not all Jesuits. But the cardinals in the great majority today are liberals. Theologically liberal, and liberal in terms of the organization of the Catholic Church. The Jesuits have had great influence, even on the other groups within the Roman Catholic Church.
Okay, we got another one here.
Pastor Bohr, I've always read, considering the Jesuits, that they were in many ways connected with the Counter-Reformation, and that was one of the reasons for their origin. Could you talk a little bit about that connection?
The main reason for the establishment of the Jesuit order was to counteract the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation began, the date that is usually given is 1517, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the cathedral door in Wittenberg. And Loyola established the Jesuit order in 1534. So you can tell, very close afterwards. And the explicit purpose of the Jesuit order was to counteract the growing Protestant menace. In fact, you can go to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and there's a statue of Loyola, and he's trampling on the head of a Protestant. I've seen that personally. So basically, the idea of the Jesuits is to eliminate Protestantism. And, you read I'm going to read a statement by Ellen White a little bit later, where she says that basically they infiltrate the educational systems, the governments, the medical world, the scientific world, all over the world, to leaven the world so that the world will go along with their philosophy. So yes, it was established directly to counteract the Protestant Reformation.
So you were talking about the fact that a disbelief in the literal creation account and evolution was one of the things that attacked was the need for a savior. You went through a series of logical steps as to how that happened. So if that's the case, and if the papacy is now coming out and saying, we believe in evolution, which is obviously what they're doing, what reason do they give for needing a savior, or is it just political expediency to keep on track with their agenda?
Okay, that's a very good question, and let me answer this way. The Roman Catholic Church, by its religion, deceives the people, and by its state aspect, deceives the political leaders. So the ceremonies of the Roman Catholic Church are to captivate the multitudes into leading them to believe that these religious leaders believe, that they're sinners and that Jesus died on the cross for them and so on. They don't believe it personally. Okay? That aspect is to deceive the masses, and they've got them pretty well deceived. The idea, for example, you're supposed to pray to Mary for favors and so on. These liberals, they don't believe in that. But they talk the talk because that's what they want the people to believe, to be loyal to the church. On the other hand, the state aspect of the Vatican is to be able to have relations with the governments of the world to influence them to do what the Roman Catholic Church wants. The Roman Catholic Church is a hybrid. It's a union of church and state, which is very dangerous. It deceives both groups by being a state and church.
So do they really believe in anything other than that they want power?
I believe in the depths of their hearts, they're atheists. But they would never say it, because if they said they were atheists, what would happen with the populace? What is this all about? They're saying that they're atheists? Come on, what is the reason for all the ceremonies and all the teachings and all the prayers to Mary if there's no such thing as a God? So they have to provide a facade. By the way, let me just share this interesting testimony for you. This coming Thursday, I'm going to be traveling to Spain. I'll be speaking at a church there on the book of Daniel. For the last 6 months or so, I've been corresponding with a Roman Catholic priest. And some of you probably received our fundraising letter in your mailboxes if you're on our mailing list. And this priest has been strongly impacted by the Adventist message. He's been watching on YouTube, he's been watching Walter Fite, he's been watching Bachelor. In the last 2 or 3 months, he's been watching the materials for Secrets Unsealed. So he wrote an email. He says, I believe Ellen White is God's prophet for the last days. I believe that the dead are dead. I believe that the Sabbath is the day that we're supposed to keep as the day of rest. He says, I believe in the 1888 message, and I know what the Roman Catholic Church is trying to do by introducing spiritual formation and contemplative prayer. I mean, this guy knows more about Adventism than the Adventist Church. And he has requested baptism. So one of the reasons I'm going is a week from this coming Thursday, we're going to be baptizing this Roman Catholic priest there in Spain. So not only are the laity watching the programming, the conservative Adventist programming, but also people, intelligent people. I mean, I'm not saying that people that haven't studied, they're not intelligent. They have a practical intelligence. People who are, you know, who have studied and have advanced degrees, you know, they're starting to come to the conclusion that, you know, where they're at is not the right place, that they need to look for something that's better. There's another individual, and I told this story also in our latest fundraising letter. There's this individual in Colombia who also watched our programming, and he contacted the pastor of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, studied our message, became an Adventist, a very well-to-do individual, you know, very well financially. And he has requested that I go back to a city on the border between Colombia and Ecuador. He says, I'm going to rent the most luxurious hall in the city. I'm going to pay all of your expenses, and I want you to present a series mainly for the upper class, the higher class people. And so later on this year, I'm going to be traveling to Colombia to do that. This is an individual who basically handles millions of dollars and has embraced the Adventist message. And so not only among the common people, but also among those who are highly educated, there's a great interest on the basis of what they see happening in the world. And that's the reason we exist as Secrets Unsealed. We only exist for one reason, that is to proliferate the message, the present-day message, present truth message of the Adventist Church. That's the reason for our existence. Yes?
How do the Freemasons fit into all this?
Well, the Freemasons are also a secret society, just like the Opus Dei and the Jesuits. I've heard that the Jesuits and the Freemasons do not like each other much. So I don't know exactly, because they're secret societies, we don't know exactly what links really exist between them and how they consider one another, other than the rumors that you hear. But Ellen White does warn us totally against all secret societies. She says we should not join secret societies. And you know, some people make it a point to say that where Ellen White is buried, there's an obelisk. And an obelisk is a Freemason symbol. And so they say that Ellen White was a Freemason because there's an obelisk at her sepulcher. Well, folks, Ellen White has many places in her writings where she condemns the Freemasons by name. Furthermore, in the cemetery where she's buried, Oak Hill Cemetery in Battle Creek, there are bunches of monuments that are obelisks of people that were never Freemasons. Simply, an obelisk was the popular thing to put on a gravesite at that time. It has no connection with secret societies. So I wish I had a better answer, but because they're secret societies, we don't know all of the inner workings that they have, one with another. Any other questions? Okay.
It sounds like from your description, John Paul I and John Paul II are kind of cut from the same cloth. I'm wondering, why was one put out of the way after 33 days and the other one was Pope for, I think, 23 years?
Because I think that the Jesuits, during the pontificate of John Paul II, still did not have a complete and strong foothold in the Roman Catholic papacy. I think it's a process that took time. And, you know, Benedict was there for several years, and the Jesuits had gained enough power at that point, enough adherents to really exercise their clout in electing, getting him to retire and to elect a Jesuit pope. And by the way, even though Benedict XVI promised that he was going to go into the shadows and he would not be seen anymore. Recently, I'm going to share this in a few moments, Benedict XVI is at war with Francis I on the issue of celibacy. Because, you know, the present Pope has shown himself open to the possibility of the bishops in Amazonia, that is in the Amazon, to be married, because they can't find enough male priests. So, you know, the fact is that they did not have their full strength at that point, but eventually they had enough strength where they said, let's just get rid of this Pope, force him to retire, and elect a Pope more to our liking. Yes?
I had a question. I heard that the Jesuits, priests, got pretty much a foul on everybody in the world, especially in America. Is that true?
The Jesuit priests what?
They have a record, a foul pretty much on everybody in America. Is that true? A record or a foul?
Well, I've never seen it. Maybe they do. You know, I don't know. You know, the bottom line is that we don't know all the inner workings of the Jesuits, but by what we're seeing, we can know what the general direction of what they want is. We can see what they're working towards. They are a secret society. So a lot of the things that are going on we don't know. Like people who say, well, the Adventist Church is infiltrated by Jesuits. The Catholic Church has planted Jesuits in the Adventist Church. Well, who are they? You know? We don't know. So let's not obsess about, well, is this one a Jesuit? Maybe that's one a Jesuit there. I'm more concerned about what they're teaching than trying to discover if they're a Jesuit that's been planted by the Roman Catholic Church in the Adventist Church. We can get caught up so much in conspiracy theories that we lose our focus. And by the way, what I'm sharing with you is not a conspiracy theory. It's all very well documented, with the sources that I mentioned, as well as many other sources that I'll be sharing when I publish the newsletter articles. There'll be at least 2 successive articles on this particular point. Anyone else? Okay, way back there.
Some more over here.
Yes, Pastor. John Paul and Francis, I've heard that they're called the White Pope. Is there a Black Pope, and is the Black Pope a military arm of the Jesuits?
Okay, good question. The Black Pope is called black because he dresses in black. He wears a black robe. The White Pope puts on a white robe. So it has to do with what they're clothed with. But the real powerful individual in the Catholic Church is the Black Pope, which is the Father General of the Jesuit order. And I'll be talking a little bit about the present Father General of the Jesuit order in our second session this afternoon. Very interesting. He's obviously a Jesuit, but can you guess what country he's from? Venezuela. Interesting. We'll come to that a little bit later on. And now I'm going to tell you what Arturo Sosa Abascal, which is the name of this new Father General, I'm going to show you, being a Jesuit, that he has this very idea that doctrine, we can't really know what we're supposed to believe in terms of doctrine. That doctrine is not set in concrete and is not unchangeable, but it changes with the times. I'm going to read you statements from him where, you know, he's... And what has he said about in Venezuela, where you have hundreds of political prisoners that are being tortured in prison, people who are starving to death, eating from the garbage? What does he say? Well, there needs to be a dialogue between the communists or the leaders and the opposition, just dialogue. But he condemns nothing of what's going on, which is very interesting, because he's a communist. And the government of Venezuela is communist. So birds of a feather flock together. Okay, any other question? Where are we? Over here.
Yes, it's interesting that we have a Jesuit Pope and a Jesuit Vice President. Do you know much about the background of Vice President Pence? Any association?
I'm not sure that Pence is a Jesuit. Maybe educated, but I think that he's a Protestant. I don't think he's a Jesuit. I think I know he's not a Jesuit. President Trump is a Presbyterian. Quotation marks. But most of the influential people that he has surrounded himself are Catholics, including Bohr, the Attorney General, and Cipollone, who's going to be defending him in the impeachment trial in the Senate, is also Roman Catholic. And most of the media has been taken over by Roman Catholics as well. And there, by the way, there are two branches in the media also. There's a conservative branch and a liberal branch. The conservative branch is Fox News. The liberal branch is what President Trump refers to as fake news. And by the way, most of the commentators in both wings are Roman Catholics. But the Roman Catholics at Fox News, they're at odds with the Pope almost on everything, because they're on the conservative side, which is in the minority in the Catholic Church. There is a minority of probably 20 to 25% of Roman Catholics that despise Francis I. In fact, when we were in Philadelphia, there was a group of conservative Catholics that were going from person to person to sign a petition for Pope Francis to outlaw abortion. And I got to talk to some of them. They said, this Pope, he is the Antichrist in the Roman Catholic Church, one of them told me, because we can't recognize our church. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? You know, what's happening in the Catholic Church is happening in the Adventist Church, is happening in the political world. Because the church is a reflection of society. Unfortunately, instead of transforming society, the church reflects society. That's sad. Okay, yes.
With evolution, death is a requirement. You can't evolve without death. And no matter how you spin or twist or turn or spiritualize creation, death is not part of it. So how does a person who believes in creation, in evolution, deal with the aspect of death?
That's one of the big dilemmas that they face. Because the Bible says that death is a result of sin. And because of death, which is a result of sin, you need somebody to save you from death, which is the Redeemer. But as there was death long before sin, the link between sin and death is broken. Because evolution doesn't function on the basis, well, you're going to get a redeemer from death. No, what happens is through evolution, eventually death will be overcome by the process of evolution. So it's something that they are not able to answer. The break between the idea of sin, death, and therefore the need of redemption. They're irreconcilable, like that newspaper article said. You can't reconcile them. It's impossible.
You mentioned earlier in the presentation that removing the literal meaning of the creation week opens the door to interpretation of multiple things like heterosexual marriage and, of course, the identity crisis issues both in Canada, the United States, and around the world. I guess my question is two-pronged. Number one, what's your insight into the, just shortly, of course, into the factors that kind of influenced the U.S. Supreme Court to legalize gay marriage? And number two, is there something like intellectual suicide going on the American colleges and universities campuses because of the embracing the LGBT ideology? And can you just give us a little bit of insight in those two issues? Because they're related to the interpretation of the first week of creation, in a way.
Right. Our public universities have been totally overtaken by liberalism. In other words, in favor of LGBT, in favor of communism and socialism, in favor of LGBTQ, etc. So basically, a whole young generation is rising in the United States that has only the view, they don't know anything about the founding of the United States, the principles upon which this nation was established. And therefore, they've been given the idea that this country is bad, that the system of capitalism is bad, and that the principles upon which this nation was built are bad. And so it's like trying to catch the wind. It's an impossible situation as long as the universities are teaching this. Many of the teachers are Marxists. They're socialists. You know, you take, for example, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. They profess religion, but they're really communists in their outlook. Because what happens is socialism, basically, if you want to contrast between socialism and capitalism, socialism believes that the government should do everything. Capitalism believes that individuals should be the builders of society. And so, you know, this idea, well, we're going to give free education, and we're going to give free health care, and we're going to give free this and free that, $1,000 a month to everybody, and so on. You know, if I was a young person, I'd say, hallelujah. I'll have $1,000 to spend. But they don't realize that what's going to happen is going to lead the country to go broke. I mean, Medicare for all, just look at the price tag. And maybe that's the entire purpose. There's a purpose behind this, and that is to take the United States to the point where it's bankrupt, because that way the system can change. So we live in perilous times. What was the other point?
The influences that influenced the United States Supreme Court to legalize gay marriage and start leading toward the socialist agenda.
Okay, when the Supreme Court approved gay marriage, two of the justices that we have now were not there. Kavanaugh was not there, and Gorsuch. They were not members of the court. Basically, the court was 4-4 with a swing vote which leaned liberal. So I believe that that's the reason why gay marriage was approved as constitutional. I'm not so sure that that would happen now. We live in dangerous times when it comes to the Supreme Court, because right now, this is supposedly a Protestant country, but right now we have 5 justices that are Roman Catholics, one who grew up Catholic, Gorsuch. He grew up Catholics and he attends the Episcopalian Church, and we have 3 Jews. There are no Protestants on the Supreme Court. Now, what happens if Judge Ginsburg should pass away? She's been sick with pancreatic cancer. What happens if she passes away and we have an election of a 7th leaning Roman Catholic? It's a scary thought. The most powerful branch of government is the judicial branch. You know, we have 3 branches of government in the United States. We have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The judicial is primarily the Supreme Court. Which is the most powerful of the 3? The Supreme Court. Why? Because Congress can write a law, but if somebody contests its constitutionality, and the court says that the law that Congress wrote is unconstitutional, the law does not become law, or the law is overturned. So, let me ask you, would a national Sunday law be unconstitutional? Clearly unconstitutional? Congress shall make no law establishing religion or forbidding the free exercise thereof. Would establishing Sunday as a national day of worship be establishing religion? Any thinking person in the world would say yes. But let me ask you this. What if the Supreme Court should declare constitutional what is unconstitutional? That's what's going to happen. Notice, there's not going to necessarily be an amendment. There might be an amendment to the Constitution, but there's really no need for an amendment, because The Supreme Court can say that Sunday laws are constitutional, even though we know that they're not constitutional. That's the reason why the beast of Revelation 13, it says that it has two horns like a lamb, which it professes civil and religious liberty, but it speaks like a dragon. In other words, what's going to happen is the Sunday law is going to be drawn up by Congress, and the United States is not going to get rid of the idea of civil and religious liberty, but in its actions, it is going to contradict its profession of standing for civil and religious liberty. So would anti-Sabbath laws be unconstitutional too? Ellen White says that there's not only going to be a national Sunday law, there's going to be anti-Sabbath keeping laws. Would that be unconstitutional? Yes, because the Constitution says, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof, which means that you can keep the Sabbath if you want. So a Sunday law would be established in religion, and an anti-Sabbath law would be forbidding the free exercise of religion. And what's going to happen is the Supreme Court is going to declare that both of those laws are constitutional, even though we know that they're unconstitutional. That's the reason why this beast has two horns like a lamb, speaks like a dragon. It contradicts in its speech what it professes to be.
One more over here, I think, and then we need to be heading into a break. If you want to give him a break before he has to speak for the rest of the afternoon.
Yeah, give me a break.
This is more of a practical question. Many of us are visiting this church today, but we are scattered about throughout the region. And this is, you talked a lot about earlier, about some of the challenges with our universities and university ministers being trained elsewhere outside of our seminaries and then coming back. What practical advice can you give anyone here today that recognizes that perhaps the minister that stands in the pulpit with a traditional love for the church, yet you're hearing things that are contrary to what we've always believed? What would you recommend as practical advice for those members?
I would recommend what Jesus recommended. First, go and speak with that person individually. If they don't listen to you, take it to the elders of the church. If they don't listen to the elders of the church, take it to the church board. And if the church board doesn't listen, then you've done your work and there's nothing more to do. We need to follow the process of going to the person first and talking to them individually and trying to win that brother or sister to the biblical view. But we are living in very perilous times, folks. All kinds of winds of doctrine are attempting to enter the Adventist church. We need to know what we believe and why we believe it. We need to be firmly grounded on present truth. And so it's vitally important for us to study, to know what we believe, to share it, and to speak up when we see our church deviating from the truth. One of the reasons why we have problems in the church is because people say, well, I know that that's wrong, but I don't want to make waves. I don't want to cause a conflict in the church. So people stay quiet. We need to speak up. Be nice. You know, be nice, be courteous. Don't be mean, because conservatives are considered mean. And many times conservatives are mean in the way that they come across. So we need to be kind and loving, but we need to be firm when it comes to the message that God has given our church.
Kind and loving. Quickly, we got to be considerate here of his time as well.
So you need to be reading the Bible so you cannot be deceived. And Mason is a secret society, and be careful with the night Columbus. And like you say, it's everywhere. It also is involved in families too. So we need to pray to God to lead us to the right path.
Amen. Amen. We need more prayer, more Bible study, and more witnessing.
Conservatives, we want to be kind but straightforward too. We need to be considerate of our time, of letting him get a little rest. So we got one more question, and if we can be quick, so we can get a little bit of break here. Be nice and concise. There you go.
Well, my question is, read a book that I got from the library a while back called In the Closet of the Vatican, and the subtitle was Power, Homosexuality, and Hypocrisy. It's written by a man named Frederick Martel, who is apparently an investigative journalist. And he spent 4 years traveling through Europe and spent a great deal of time at the Vatican and gained entrance to the inner sanctum of the Vatican and was able to get a lot of people to talk. And he learned that they feel that probably 75% of the priests, especially in the upper echelons of the church, are gay. But of course, what's preached by those people is very homophobic, and and they're very anti-LGBT, and I just wondered, how that plays into the tack the Jesuits are taking, and I think it also, according to this author, had something to do with Benedict XVI's resignation too.
Oh, absolutely. Benedict was too conservative for the Catholic Church, for what the Jesuits were trying to do.
Yeah, these people were mostly, it was mostly John Paul II and Benedict that the book addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's another evidence of what I'm sharing here, that's what's happening in the Roman Catholic Church. By the way, I'm going to share with you some very interesting quotations. In one of the trips that Pope Francis I took, he did a news conference on the plane. Somebody asked him what he thought about marriage between a man and a man and a woman and a woman. He says, "Who am I to judge?" That tells everything of what he believes concerning gay marriage. He's in favor of gay marriage. He is in favor of women priests. He doesn't openly say it, because there would be a revolution by the conservatives, but he firmly in his heart believes in a non-celibate priesthood, and he believes in the ordination of women priests as well. He is a Jesuit of the most radical kind, socialist, he's made ecumenical trips. He's made trips to Buddhist nations, Hindu nations, Muslim nations, Christian nations, Catholic nations, and he's constantly saying we all need to come together. Lay aside our differences and come together. That is the new Jesuit model. See, the way they used to be, defend church doctrine, defend the authority of the Pope. No way to win over the rulers of the world. Or the scientists teaching creation, hello. Or Protestants, when you say, we got the truth. What Protestant's going to want to unite with them? Nobody. But if you can make the Roman Catholic Church palatable to all these groups, everything can synthesize.